What if I told you that every successful person you admire has one thing in common? They've all failed miserably at some point in their lives now. Let's face it, failure is not what we normally associate with success, right? We're taught to be perfect, to always win, and to never give up. But the harsh reality is that failure is an essential part of the learning process. And it's something that even the most accomplished individuals have had to deal with. Take Thomas Edison, for instance. He's famous for inventing the light bulb. But what most people don't know is that he failed over 1,000 times before getting it right. And that's not counting all the other failed experiments he conducted along the way. Or consider J.K. Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series. She was a single mom living on welfare when her first book was rejected by 12 publishers. Can you imagine getting rejected that many times and still managing to keep going? The point I'm making here is that failure is not something to be ashamed of. It's actually a stepping stone to success, and it's something that we all need to learn to embrace. So, why do we struggle with failure so much? Well, for one thing, it's often seen as a reflection of our self-worth. When we fail, we tend to think that we're not good enough, or that we're somehow flawed. But the truth is that failure is not a reflection of our worth as individuals. It's just a reflection of our limitations. Another reason we struggle with failure is that we often tie our sense of identity to our achievements. We become so attached to our successes that when we fail, it feels like we're losing a part of ourselves. But the truth is that our identity is not defined by our achievements. It's defined by who we are as people. So, how can we start to see failure in a more positive light? Well, for one thing, we can start to reframe our thinking around it. Instead of seeing failure as a negative experience, we can start to see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. This is something that entrepreneurs are especially good at. They know that failure is a natural part of the learning process, and they're not afraid to take risks and try new things, even if it means failing along the way. In fact, some of the most successful entrepreneurs, like Steve Jobs and Richard Branson, have spoken publicly about the importance of embracing failure. They've said that failure is not something to be feared, but something to be learned from. So, what can we learn from the way that successful people approach failure? Well, for one thing, we can learn the importance of taking risks. When we're not afraid to take risks, we're more likely to try new things. And that's where the real learning happens. We can also learn the importance of being resilient. When we fail, we need to be able to bounce back. And that means developing a growth mindset, a mindset that sees failure as an opportunity to learn and grow. And finally, we can learn the importance of being kind to ourselves. When we fail, it's easy to beat ourselves up over it, but that's not helpful. What's helpful is to be kind to ourselves, and to remind ourselves that failure is a normal part of the learning process. How can we start to apply these lessons to our own lives? Well, for one thing, we can start to reframe our thinking around failure. Instead of seeing it as a negative experience, we can start to see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. We can also start to take more risks, whether it's trying new things or pursuing new opportunities. When we're not afraid to take risks, we're more likely to learn and grow. And finally, we can start to be kinder to ourselves. When we fail, we can remind ourselves that it's okay to make mistakes, and that failure is a normal part of the learning process. In fact, one of the most powerful things we can do is to start to see failure as a badge of honor. Instead of something to be ashamed of, we can start to see it as a sign that we're willing to take risks and to try new things. This is something that I like to call the failure mindset. It's a mindset that sees failure as an opportunity to learn and grow. rather than something to be feared, and it's a mindset that's essential for success. Because when we're not afraid to fail, we're more likely to take risks and to try new things. And that's where the real learning happens also. Let's talk about some practical ways to start to develop this failure mindset. One thing we can do is to start to keep a failure journal. A journal where we write down all the times we failed and what we've learned from those experiences. This can be a really powerful way to reframe our thinking around failure. When we see all the times we've failed and what we've learned from those experiences, we can start to see failure in a more positive light. We can also start to celebrate our failures. Instead of seeing them as something to be ashamed of, we can start to see them as opportunities to learn and grow. And finally, we can start to ask ourselves some tough questions. What am I afraid of? What am I holding back on? What am I not willing to try because I'm afraid of failure? When we start to ask ourselves these kinds of questions, we can start to see where our fear of failure is holding us back, and we can start to take steps to overcome that fear. So, what's the first step we need to take in order to start to develop this failure mindset? Well, it's simple. We need to start to see failure as an opportunity to learn and grow instead of something to be feared. And that means being willing to take risks, whether it's trying new things or pursuing new opportunities. When we're not afraid to take risks, we're more likely to learn and grow, and that's what it's all about. Learning and growing and becoming the best version of ourselves. If you're ready to start to see failure in a more positive light and to start to develop the failure mindset, then stick around. In our next video, we'll be exploring some more practical strategies for overcoming our fear of failure and for developing the kind of resilience that's essential for success.